I'm excited to announce our third speaker and the respondent. So our speaker is Dr. Christian Tsekpoe, an ordained minister of the Church of Pentecost, pastoring a Lang Worship Centre, a congregation of over 1,000 members in Accra, Ghana. He holds a PhD from the Oxford Centre for Mission Studies in the UK and served as research faculty at Fuller Seminary, where he undertook his postdoctoral research fellowship under the Global Mission Research Institute program here. He's a senior lecturer, a head of department, and a member of the governing council of Pentecost University. He's also a member of the Faith and Order Commission of the World Council of Churches, which means he's going to the big conference in Nicaea next month. And he's an executive editor of the journal Pentecostal Education, which is comes out from the World Alliance for Pentecostal Theological Education. His research focuses on Pentecostal charismatic Christianity, and he's authored numerous articles and books. Appropriately, in view of the theme of this year's Missiology Lectures, he's the author of a book that I was going to wave at you, but I forget it. This one, which is called Intergenerational Missiology, an African Pentecostal Charismatic Perspective, published in 2022. Responding to Dr. Tsekpoe is our very own Dr. David H. Scott, who is busy today, because he's also our faculty planner for this year's Missiology Lectures. He joined the faculty of Fuller in 2012, although he actually began his career back in Fuller back in 2003, when he helped to develop the first School of Intercultural Studies class on children at risk. Since that time, he's continued to provide strategic leadership in the development of children at risk studies, while also serving in a variety of administrative capacities. From 2009 to 2014, he served as Associate Director of the Centre for Missiological Research here at Fuller, helping many students through their THM and PhD programs. And from 2019 to 2021, he was Associate Dean of the School of Theology and the School of Intercultural Studies, before they became the single School of Mission and Theology in 2020. In 2021, he was appointed Accreditation Liaison Officer for Fuller, for which we're all very grateful. And this past summer, he was named Interim Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs and Institutional Effectiveness. So, after hearing from our respondent, Drs. Tsekpoe and Scott will take questions. So please be sure to submit your questions using Hoover's Q&A feature for all the participants, whether you're in person or online. And we'll try to answer as many as time allows. So, Dr. Tsekpoe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirsten Kim, for this kind invitation and for giving me the space to do a presentation here. Thank you also, Professor David Scott, for all the arrangements that have been made so far. I'm speaking on the topic, Mission in a New Generation, an Intergenerational Approach. And so this is part of my whole thinking and research. I have tried speaking to young people about mission. I have tried speaking to old people about mission. So I see mission from an intergenerational perspective, where the attention is not on young people alone or old people alone, but the attention is on all generations in mission together. Yeah, so that's what I'll be looking at briefly in this presentation, even as I go on. So I begin with a very important question that looks like part of my conclusion. This question is dear to me. Yeah. So I'm looking at the kind of conclusion that I have drawn right from the beginning, that mission theology has to be reconsidered for every generation. not for fashion, but because people are cultural and cultures continue to change. This conclusion is what I'm trying to engage throughout the presentation. I trust that God will help me to do a good work by the end of my presentation. So the gap I have identified is this. I'm looking at what mission is. I think this is good. All right, so I'm looking at the gap that despite the recognition that mission transcends geographical cultures, missiology as a discipline has predominantly focused on foreign missions, often overlooking the significance of mission within multi-generational context. What I mean is that missiology has acknowledged the fact that mission is not only geographical, but mission is also generational, which means that mission is both vertical and horizontal, time and space. But it looks like research on mission has focused on space from one geographical center to another, but mission has not been seen from the dimensions of time. We do children ministry, we do youth ministry, we pay attention to children, we pay attention to youth, but we do not approach these groups of people from a missiological point of view. We approach them as ministry. So we see children's ministry, we see youth ministry, but to see these generations unfolding from a missiological perspective, I see a very big gap here. And I'll try to use some of the available literature, just a few of them, to illustrate this argument. I begin by using Andrew Wall's book on the missionary movement in Christian history, studies in the transformation of faith, which he wrote somewhere in 1996. In one of the chapters, I think the beginning chapter, Andrew Walls did a very good job by giving us the metaphor of a long-living scholarly space visitor, which Andrew Walls calls the professor of comparative interplanetary religion. So the name of the professor, interplanetary, is speaking already that the professor is doing is comparing Christianity from one planet to another. So I am also thinking about intergenerational kind of comparative analysis. But this is what he did. According to Andrew Walls, in 37 Common Era, or AD, this scholar visited Christians, but the scholar went to Jerusalem and saw that all the Christians at that time, around 37 CE, were Jews. They were all circumcised people, and they have the Old Testament, the Torah, the Prophet, and the Psalms, and that was the scripture that they were emphasizing on. But they were followers of Christ, and they talked about the Messiah. Then this scholar went back to space. After 300 years, around 320 CE, the scholar came back, but this time did not go to Jerusalem, went to Rome, and of course visited the Nicaea conference when the arguments about doctrine were being debated. He was surprised, the scholar was surprised to see that many of the Christians at this point were not circumcised. As the first group he came to meet, Sabbath was not too important for them, but they were debating on doctrinal issues. He was also surprised to see that the books that the people in Jerusalem were using, they are using these books, but they have been translated from from Hebrew to Greek, and they also have a new book, which is portions of the New Testament that they were using. And so the scholar went back. Then, about 300 years later, this scholar returned, did not go to Jerusalem, did not go to Rome, but went to Northern Europe, specifically Ireland, and then saw that these people were quite more ascetic at this time. They were praying in the snows. They were fasting continuously. They were living their life just for the Lord, thinking that everything that they have to do to get salvation depend on their strength and their ability. And so he saw that many things that he saw in Rome were also different from these people. But one thread that kept all the groups going is the emphasis on the lordship of Jesus Christ. And whether they call him Messiah or they call him Jesus Christ, it was the emphasis. They were also using the same book, translated now into different languages. Of course, in Northern Ireland, they were also using the Greek translations of the book. Then the scholar went back, but this time kept quite long, about over 1,000 years, and then returned in 1840. But this time, the scholar came to London, Western Europe, and saw and met the Protestant movement, and very vibrant at this point. They were not fasting like the people he met about 1,000 years ago. They were eating a lot, but they were also engaging some kind of political issues, engaging the slave trade in Africa. They were preparing missionaries and sending them to Africa, Latin America, and other places. In fact, the Greek book has been translated into English among persecutions and other things. Other Christian literature have developed at this point. Then this space visitor went back and came back after 100 years, and this time landed in Nigeria, specifically Lagos, and he saw that the people were now in long dresses. They called themselves cherubim and seraphim, and they were holding bells. But in each of the centers that the space visitor visited, the people were mentioning the same name, the Lordship of Jesus Christ, but their expression of the faith continued to change as the faith moves from one particular planet to another, or from one particular center to another. Now, he used this to describe the gospel as both a liberator and the prisoner of our faith, talking about the fact that there is the need for continuity and discontinuity, and we need to be conscious to context anytime the gospel is moving from one geographical location to another, from one planet to another. My concern here is that this is really good for us, because Andrew Walls have actually helped us to look at how the mission history of the church has been over the years. Very important document. But nobody has kind of compared the faith in Jerusalem from its beginning through the ages. After 300 years, what is happening in Jerusalem? After 600 years, what is happening in Jerusalem? After 1,000 years, what is happening in Jerusalem? After 1,100 years, and today, what is happening in Jerusalem? Has there been a comparison over the generations to see what has happened to the faith? And the same thing happens to all the other centers of vitality. Somehow, mission history has taught us that Christianity has been shifting centers of vitality since its commencement in Jerusalem up to date. So the question I keep asking is that what the Great Commission has been? Is it to shift from one place to another? Was Christ expecting the faith to spread or to shift? This is a question I have not found answer to, and I don't claim to know why. I've talked to many people. I've asked a lot of questions. I have a lot of assumptions in my mind, but I ask myself, why is the center of Christian vitality shifting and not spreading? As the church grows at one center of vitality, it seems to be dying at another center of Christian vitality. Somehow, I may be tempted to say that one of my assumptions for intergenerational missiology is to say that because we have not engaged mission to the generations well, we are harvesting the fruit of what we sow, because mission has concentrated on foreign lands, and so the faith will definitely grow in foreign lands. And because we have not invested into the generations, we may not harvest from the generations. Of course, contemporary writers have also done some work. One of them is Mel Robeck, who is in Fuller here, has written an article on Pentecostal mission from Azusa Street to the ends of the earth. What about the very end of the age? And there are other books also written as Mission to the Ends of the Earth. This one is Alan Anderson, To the Ends of the Earth, Pentecostalism and Transformation of World Christianity. So this one also, To the Ends of the Earth. I have been thinking of getting a book or an article on To the Ends of, or to the very end of the age, and that is the gap. in fact, I'm still talking about this gap. I'm spending a lot of time to think aloud about this gap so we can all find solutions to it. I have also seen that this gap, apart from literature, apart from research, the gap also exists in our curricula in various theological institutions. Missionaries are being intentionally trained and sent out to foreign lands. But I'm yet to see an institution that is intentional about training missionaries to foreign generations, where we consider the generations as a mission field, not just as a ministry for us to dump whatever we have on them, but to approach them as mission. For instance, when people are traveling from North America to Ghana, in Africa specifically, they have the consciousness of the fact that they are going to mission field. At least today, missionaries will not want to go and replicate their mission models in Africa because they know the contexts are different. But what about our children? We assume that they are all in North America here together with us. So what we experience in our faith, they should experience. So we dump what we have on them, and they get disconnected from everything that we tell them because the languages are different. One of the things I am seeing as a problem is our interpretation of Scripture. For example, the Scripture that is mainly translated as the Great Commission by many people is said, Matthew 28:19 says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations." This is what is forcing missionaries and missiologists to look at the gospel's traveling, the gospel spreading to all nations, which is good. But the end of that Great Commission, the verse 20 says that, "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Why are we engaging the all nations, but not engaging the very end of the age? This is one of my arguments about our interpretation of the Great Commission. So the Great Commission, from my thinking, is to all nations, to the ends of the earth, but also to the very end of the age. And once we concentrate on one side, I think that our mission may not be complete. Can we go back one step? No, back. Sorry about that. Yeah, forward now. Okay, all right, sure. Then this one to Acts chapter 1, verse 8, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you." This is the NIV translation. "And you will be my witnesses." I have checked from all the translations that I can read, and there is nowhere the Bible says that you will be my witnesses from Jerusalem to Judea. It's never from. It is in Jerusalem and in Judea. And in fact, the King James even make it clearer that both in Jerusalem and in Judea. So in Jesus' mind, he was expecting us to keep the faith in Jerusalem, add Judea, keep the faith in Jerusalem and Judea, add Samaria, keep the faith in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then we can travel to the ends of the earth. But what do we see today? Instead of spreading, we keep shifting. As the church grows in the Greco-Roman world, it dies in Jerusalem. As it grows in Western Europe, it dies in the Greco-Roman world. As the church grows in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, it declines in Europe. Is that what the Bible actually, is that what the Great Commission is about? Or is there a missing link somewhere? Is it God's own waves of doing things, or are we missing something? These are questions I'm still engaging. So again, my understanding of the Great Commission shows here, that mission should be to the ends of the earth, that is all nations, and to the very end of the age, all generations. Now, I understand this argument right from Jesus' ministry among the Jews when he entered the Jewish community and started his earthly ministry. He faced this same challenge of people trying to hold on to what they know and not willing to allow new things to emerge. Before Jesus' incarnation into the Jewish context, they already have in their mind who a godly person should be, fasting regularly, observing the Sabbath, not walking or associating with sinners. So everything Jesus was doing contradicted what they knew about a godly person. Meanwhile, Jesus posed himself as the Son of God. So he was a problem to them. So they tried to challenge him. And one of the occasions, they asked him this question, that why is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees, they actually observe the rules of a religious person. They fast regularly and they obey all the rules. But your disciples are eating and drinking. And of course, in their mind also, fellowshipping with tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus gave them this parable, that no one puts new wine into old wine skins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins and it will be spilled and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wine skins. So when you put new wine into new wine skin, you lose both. The wine skin will burst, you lose it, and the new wine would spill over or spill away. You lose both. Again, my assumption comes to the fact that because we have not engaged the generations from a missional perspective, approaching them from a missional perspective, we keep losing them because we force them into old wine skins, and the skins always get burst, and we lose the generations. In North America here, one of the researches carried out, I think, by David Kinnaman, talking to young people who have gone to church and dropped out. One thing they told him is that the church got disconnected from us. We didn't leave church, but the church got disconnected from us because the adult generation will always want to force the young people into their known wine skins and want them to fit into it. Very difficult. This is not only a problem with North America. My research is actually based on the African context, and this is a big challenge, especially among Pentecostalism that is about 100 years old now. The older generations are struggling to handle the young generation because what they have tasted and thought it was good and brought growth to the church, they want to keep. And the young people are agitating for change. So there is that kind of conflict among the old and the young generation. Now, I think that, this statement here, Jesus made one more statement, and that is quite serious for all of us to consider. He said, and no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. Jesus is not saying the old is better, but he's saying that everyone who has drunk an old wine will always say it is better, and they will not want the new. This wineskin is our theological formulations. And every old wineskin was new before. And every new wineskin will become old. So even the young generation today, whatever they struggle to finally agree on as authentic theologies, as we see in Africa, as we see in Asia, now Africans have created African theology, Asians have created Asian theology, liberation theology in Latin America. All these theologies were created out of context. And they will become old wineskin if nothing is done about it. In my own context in Africa, I see African theologians trying to force 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980 African theology on the current generation, and they are calling it authentic grassroots African theology. For example, describing Jesus as a hunter, describing Jesus as a grinding stone, when my children have no knowledge about who a hunter and what a grinding stone is. How can they connect with Jesus, who is a grinding stone and a hunter they have no idea about? And how long can we call this African theology? For which Africans? 1970 Africans or 2025 Africans? These are things that missiology will have to engage and see what we can do out of this. All right. I think I have to quickly move. So this is what I was trying to talk about. In every generation, as the older people drink a particular wine and are comfortable with that, they want to keep that faith and keep the church growing. In the diaspora, it happens the same way. I have visited many of the churches. The Church of Pentecost started from Ghana, but now has branches in many nations, about 190 countries globally. In North America here, in California here, we have few congregations as well. I have visited, in fact, when I came here last 2 years, I visited some of the congregations. I remember one day walking into one of the Church of Pentecost congregations in the UK, and the church practices, the liturgy, and everything was quite old. I was even finding it difficult to connect. When I tried to engage, I realized that the Ghanaians who traveled to UK in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s tried to preserve the church as it was in Ghana. Even though those of us in Ghana have moved on, they tell the children, this is how it is done in Ghana. And they kept the 1970, 1980 Church of Pentecost practice in 2018 UK, when the church in Ghana had actually moved on. And so if those children should manage to come to Ghana, they will realize that what their parents are preserving for them is not Church of Pentecost anyway. So these are things we engage in almost every context. This is a personal experience I had. And this one told me that I have also already become old and getting disconnected from the younger generation. I used to think I was young until this very experience when I went to church on a Children's Day, and then the children's ministry performed a choreography. The dance, the song, the music, everything, I didn't understand. Then I also realized that the older people, those of my age and older than me, did not understand what was happening in church on that day, but the young people were so excited about the whole choreography. So immediately they finished. Fortunately, I was the pastor in charge that day. I called the leader of the team to come and give us a brief explanation of what they have done. And she comes to tell me that the song they sang on which they danced is titled Prepaid. And what it meant is that the life they live as Christians is a life that has already been paid on the cross by Christ. And so they are living a prepaid life. And so their dancing and joy means that everything that concerns them has been paid on the cross. After the explanation, I saw both the old and the young clapping for them. Now the old people understood what they were doing. Initially, when they were dancing, because we didn't understand the song, they didn't even put the lyrics on the screen for us to read. We were so detached, and some of the old people were like, these young people want to spoil the church for us. But after the explanation, they were happy. Then I realized that the old people are really not against the young. The young also are not against the old, but they do not understand each other. Now, one thing that brought all of us clapping that day was the fact that an explanation was given. Assuming it was not Children's Day, for the children to join the adult service and do the choreography, how could we adults know about this prepaid Christology, which the young people are practicing, and we have no idea? We will be handling grinding stone Christology. The young people will be handling prepaid Christology. Now, I now began to think through, then I see threads of technology in their understanding of Christ, ecclesiology, everything that they do. For example, one artist called King Promise sang a local language song, but brought in this word that God is my CCTV. Wherever I go, his eyes are on me. Then I read this book written by a Kenyan theologian, Wanjiro Gitao, who describes discipleship as a GPS route where the discipler knows the way and leads followers to the right destination. Young people in Ghana would be talking about God's hotline when they interpret Jeremiah 33:3, call unto me. So they interpret it as calling unto God. But look at the language they use. Then I saw this poster on Facebook, and I copied it. It's a poster calling people for prayer in the afternoon, but they call it midday call. Midday call. This guy is a pastor of the Church of Pentecost, the church in which I also pastor. And then he is calling people to afternoon prayer. He calls it midday call. Why is it a call? So there is a language the young people are speaking now, which tells us that their technology, their understanding of church, their understanding of theology has been shaped by technological languages. This is where what I mean by intergenerational approach, where there should be the opportunity for young people and old people to meet intentionally. But this meeting should be deliberate. The old people should be trained as missionaries, working among young people so they can approach mission from a missiological perspective. For example, if missionaries are going somewhere, we have to learn the language, we have to raise indigenous leaders, we have to do A, B, and C. Can we approach the younger generation from the same missiological perspective? So I define intergenerational missiology as a deliberate mission approach in which the different generations in the church have the opportunity to mutually interact for the purpose of fostering faith relationships and expressions that facilitate the transmission of the Christian faith from one generation to another in culturally relevant ways. In such meetings, all generations are actively engaged in the missional activities of the church, while the older generations are deliberate in fostering or in favoring the young people are also deliberate in respecting the old. I picked this concept of favoring the young and respecting the old from David Hilborn, who wrote extensively on these intergenerational interactions. Intergenerational interactions are seen to foster belonging, support for families, better use of resources, character growth, and other unique benefits which are very important for our mission. The concept of reciprocity, which is very important in mission, is also demonstrated in this aspect of our understanding of mission. And I think that it's important for us to engage all these aspects of our mission if only we would be able to do what we want to understand from a missional perspective. Now, before I conclude, let me mention that, all right, so I said the concept of reciprocity among generations, as well as the intentionality and mutuality of intergenerational interactions, has the capacity to allow faith transmission to be incarnational. Intentional intergenerational mission requires that when all generations meet, the children, the youth, are all allowed to be actively involved, not just passive participants. Sometimes we bring children and old people together, but the children become passive spectators, and we think it's intergenerational. Intergeneration means that everyone should participate. My recommendation is that as missiology increasingly engage with intergenerational mission studies, it is imperative to focus scholarly attention on the dynamics of digital cultures. This includes the examination of digital mission, virtual discipleship, and digital theology. Of course, if we like virtual or digital missiology as well. Such inquiry is essential for understanding the evolving landscape of mission in the context of contemporary global technological advancement. I will conclude with this reading from the Cape Town Commitment of the Lausanne Movement. Children and young people are the church today, not merely of tomorrow. Young people have great potential as active agents in God's mission. They represent an enormous underused pool of influences with sensitivity to the voice of God and willingness to respond to Him. As we see in the Bible, God can and does use children and young, their prayer, their insights, their words, their initiatives in changing hearts. They represent new energy to transform the world. Let us listen and not stifle their childlike spirituality with our adult rationalistic approach. Thank you very much.
There we go. Dr. Tsekpoe, I want to start by expressing my appreciation for your presentation and for the theme that you've presented us today. I'm particularly intrigued by our application of contextualization theory as a frame for understanding the need for missiology, like wineskins, to change over time in relation to each generation of young people, a concept that holds great affinity with our work in these days. I also happen to agree that the idea of intergenerational missiology addresses a critical gap in existing missiology and deserves much greater attention than it has so far received. In fact, the force of your argument makes me feel convicted that we at Fuller do not currently require students in our master's programs to complete any class that necessarily considers intergenerational approaches to mission or ministry. Rather, the consideration of how to minister to families and how children and youth fit within the mission of God only happens depending on which classes students select or who happens to teach those classes. You are offering a compelling case for rethinking that approach. But it is also significant that you arrived at this conclusion not as a child advocate, like some of us, trying to justify your already existing ministry commitment. That is, you are not already what many in the United States might consider a kid person. Rather, it's compelling that you arrived at this conclusion as an objective scholar interested primarily in understanding the work of a Western missionary who was fundamental to the establishment of your denomination and seeking to discern where he achieved, but where many current church and mission efforts in the Church of Pentecost have struggled. And you can read this in his book. That means that your testimony here has even greater credibility than someone like me about the importance of this intergenerational missiology. It also reminds me of that very last verse of Malachi chapter 4, the last verse in the Old Testament, in fact, that urges Israel to turn the hearts of the parents to the children and the hearts of the children to their parents in order to forestall the day of the Lord. I wanted to offer one challenge, however. I wonder how your intergenerational missiology might be made more relevant to populations that are overlooked by churches if they're not intentionally considered. And in fact, because you have defined your intergenerational missiology primarily as being about enhancing faith between the generations of families that are already in the church, I wonder if it could be made more explicit that, for example, this effort would make the church as a whole be able to offer a more compelling Christian witness to those outside the walls of the church. But I also wonder whether you might consider how intergenerational missiology might apply and be helpful for children of other families outside the church, as well as children that do not have families. This is a population that is really commonly overlooked by local churches, and I would really love to see that be incorporated into what you offer. However, if you are going to do that, it means we must also engage the somewhat tricky problem of evangelism with children. The time I have right now precludes a deeper discussion of this important topic, but I should at least recommend reviewing the work of Elmer John Thiessen, who's done excellent work on his The Ethics of Evangelism and his follow-up work, The Scandal of Evangelism, which specifically addresses ethical considerations for evangelism with children, as well as evangelism in contexts of relief and development, which I am very interested in. I'd also like to extend and perhaps, yeah, thanks, you changed it for me, thanks. I'd also like to extend and perhaps nuance your claim that intergenerational missiology is a gap in existing missiology. After having encountered several similar claims over the past 2 decades, I decided to pursue a small research project to investigate that question. I published that research in 2023 in Mission Studies in an article titled, "Where Are Children in Missiology?" To find a relevant metric for my analysis, I used several online databases to search the titles and abstracts of articles published in 7 English journals of missiology for a set of child-related terms, things like child, youth, teen, girl, boy, baby, etc., from the time each journal began until the present. And I found a total of 213 articles, significantly more than a 1997 article by Dan Brewster claimed, which was just 2. Structuring the data by decade resulted in the graph on the next slide. I guess I can just push this. There we go. Oh, no, you're going too far. I clicked it too. Okay, okay, there we go. That's Lily. If you know Lily's purple plastic purse. Anyway, I included some child literature-focused images here because I wanted to encourage us all to be thinking more along those terms. So what you get is this graph, and I broke it down by decade, and you can see that starting in 1910, we're talking about, maybe 1 or 2 articles per decade. And then all of a sudden in 1980, you see this burst of interest that increases in 1990. That's where you get a lot of things happening, but then it's still a lot more than it was before. That I found encouraging. 213 articles is an encouraging finding, again, much more than those 2 that were previously reported. But then what I did is I actually read the articles in question to try to understand how were children treated? What was the context in which they were considered in each of these articles? And that was also revealing. Now, there's a lot that I can say, and I did say a lot in the article, but let me just note that one of the major things that I came away with was that Christian missiologists, while they were early on the global stage of drawing attention to the needs of children, so that was something that those early articles going back to 1910 talked about, we were very slow to pick up the tools of international engagement, things like child rights and the development of childhood studies in the 1990s. And so as a result, missiologists lagged behind on those things. So we continued to talk about children mostly as objects of care rather than subjects of their own care. And so that's where I proposed this little typology of type 0, which is approaches to children in missiology, which is where we're just basically objectifying children. Oh, these poor children, maybe we're sentimental about them, we get very emotional about them, and there's something that needs to be done. Kind of like the Reverend's wife in The Simpsons, won't someone please think of the children kind of thing. But then it moves into, as we get later in that period, attending to children, that's the term that I call it, which is actually paying attention to them as subjects, but then further leaning into how can we critically empower children to understand that they are rights bearers and they can play a role in their own care. So that was the typology that I offered, and I would like to suggest that perhaps if we could find a balance between your very helpful balance between, what did you say, respecting I lost it in my notes here. There it is, favoring the young while respecting the old. I would love to see empowerment of young people as a component as well, because I think it's more than favoring. I think it leans into really helping children to recognize what they can do. The last note that I'd like to share, and I may not get to the last comment there, is that while I've encountered a range of reasons why resistance to intergenerational missiology exists in different cultures and contexts, perhaps the one I found to be most daunting is that attending to children can invoke critically attending to our own childhoods. That is, the patient curiosity that's required to really understand and listen to children often creates potent opportunities to remember, sometimes painfully, moments in our own childhoods that we're reluctant to embrace. But if we see becoming integrated beings that appreciate the continuity of our identities over a lifetime as a good in itself, we may be able to recognize that choosing to attend to children and indeed learn from them is an opportunity to know ourselves better and perhaps even see our childhoods through more forgiving eyes, even the loving eyes of God, something that we may not have been able to as easily do the first time we went through that time. And indeed, I think this is a really wonderful representation of what Jesus was talking about being born again of water and spirit. The last thing, if that's not a strong enough reason to engage in child-attentive missiology, I'll add one more dimension that should be especially important to those of us who serve in seminaries. That is, references to children in childhood are found on virtually every page of the Bible. That means that if we're not subjected our cognitive schemas related to our understanding of children to careful and sensitive critique, we should inevitably expect that any theology that is predicated on an understanding of childhood and any related concepts like maturity, growth, birth, etc., may be desperately in need of reconsideration. As an example, it's not revolutionary to make the theological assertion that we are children of God who are invited by our Father to participate in God's mission. But if our understanding of the participation of children is limited to those type 0 understandings that children can do only the most meaningless or menial tasks, we may have a deeply flawed understanding of how much our missional choices and activities really matter in God's economy. On the other hand, if we're able to adopt a frame of child participation that sees young people as having agency and playing vital and valued roles in their families, churches, and communities, like what I see in your model of intergenerational missiology, how much more value might we be able to place on our own contributions to mission? Thank you.
Magically, the questions are here. I need to engage more digitally, obviously. So we have plenty of questions. Some of them are from your students in Ghana who've been watching online, which is nice to see. The first one is, are there African missiologists who critically engage the gap that you identified, apart from yourself?
Yeah, as at now, I haven't come across any writing. I'm still searching. If there are, I haven't come across. I know people working on young people. There are people working on children, people working on youth.
Yes.
But I haven't seen anyone engaging intergenerational missions. No. I'm yet to see one.
Yes, and that's the distinctive of your presentation, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. And then there's a question that you may understand better than I do. It says, but it's got quite a lot of traction. I would like to find out your view on this. Can we generalize the fact that the entire church growth in the world is as a result of the old missionaries who planted these churches and not any new measures?
Okay. Yeah, I think that it will be quite difficult to make a generalization. Yes, missionaries that have pioneered work in Africa have contributed a lot. Both Western missionaries and indigenous collaborators have done a lot. We can credit the growth of the church in Africa to their efforts, but missions work is continuous and work is still going on. New efforts are still going in. So I think that it's an intergenerational effort, not just effort of old missionaries, but everybody who is engaged in mission in Africa has contributed to what we see today.
Okay, so it's helping to make your point about, yes, the continuity across the generations. How can we advocate for more voices in discipleship and formal training for sending cross-culturally, such as training generations 1.5 born overseas who grew up in another nation, or generation 2 parents born overseas, and it's about engaging them in growing ethnic fellowships. Some writings cited today are from 20 to 50 years ago, is the comment.
All right, thank you very much. I think the diaspora missions work, it's a very important one, especially within contemporary times when there is second and third generation of Africans all over the world engaging Christian mission. I think that what we need is that kind of intentionality, as I have said throughout my presentation and my research, where mission theology has to be reconsidered for every generation. Now, I think that if I take my own church, Church of Pentecost, for example, into consideration, one of the things that I see happening is that the first generation Africans who went to other nations found it very difficult to engage indigenous people, both in North America, in Europe, or wherever they go. Somehow, the second and third generation, who are the children of these first generation migrants, are able to connect better. I visited our Church of Pentecost, one of the churches in Amsterdam. It's called Amsterdam City Church. I was surprised to see that it was not the usual Church of Pentecost I've seen in other places where Ghanaian community in Amsterdam will meet or Ghanaian community in Pasadena will meet. But this is a mixture of indigenous Dutch people and Ghanaians. In fact, almost 50-50, because the leader of the church, though born to Ghanaian parents, grew up in the community, speaks their language very well, relates with them so well. So I think that this is where our intentionality is. If we are able to engage the young people from a missiological perspective for them to catch what the older people have in terms of principle, not in terms of mood, they would be able to extend the mission of the older generation. For example, in the Church of Pentecost, the missionary who actually pioneered the work is called James McKeown. People want to hold on to James McKeown's practices. My argument is that people who want to rather sustain the legacy of James McKeown should look for his principle, not his practices. Then they can sustain that mission.
Okay, right. Dave, do you have anything to add at this point?
I feel like I need to just listen to what he has to say.
Okay. You're not using your mic.
Yeah,
but yes.
I need to listen to what my colleague has to say on that.
Okay.
but before we go on, I think that Dave raised some important questions in his response that I need to quickly talk about. One of them is how we can engage people who are not already in the church. Because, of course, as he's rightly said, my concentration has been the generations within the church, how we can bridge the gap, not reaching out. But I think it's an important area he has raised. And this is an area, of course, my students who are listening to me and people who are interested in intergenerational missiology should start thinking about. But then when we engage the ethical issues, I think it will be easy for us to do intergenerational mission in reaching out to the lost, more than just pushing children to go into mission. Because intergenerational mission requires that both adults and children will be in mission together. So if we are reaching out, it is not just children going out to witness, but one adult, one child, one adult. Because even though children have a lot of potential, we cannot run away from the fact that they are vulnerable and they need some kind of protection and guidance from the adults. So doing mission together and reaching out, I think it will be an interesting thing to develop. So I encourage everybody and myself to see how we can go into that. Thank you for that.
Well, I do have something to add on that. I would also encourage thinking about the nature of the formation that's taking place so that young people and adults are not thinking just about mission as a special thing that they're doing, but actually something that, you know, a young person, when they are at school or whatever, can be talking about this faith. And I think that that's going to be more likely to happen if a young person has been engaged and feeling valued in their faith within their church community. So I think it's the kind of thing where I would expect that if intergenerational missiology happens the way I think I see you describing it, that should be a natural outcome. So rather than a special thing that needs to happen.
We are, just for information, we are running a little bit over time because we started rather late. We'll just go on for another 4 minutes. And I would like to interject a question. What you're talking about in terms of the transmission of mission from one generation, or transmission of the gospel from one generation to another, I've heard sometimes described as the biological growth of the church. It seems to me that the biological growth of the church has a lot to do with women's contribution to mission. And that, so I'm just going to interject a gender observation here. Is it possible that one of the reasons why the biological growth of the church has been so overlooked is because it's what women do. And I've often heard men say mission is all about evangelism and planting churches and preaching and so on, which is what they do. And thereby they exclude women from mission.
I think that's a wonderful observation. It's possible because most of the times, even though women are involved in the mission of the church, it's more of a kind of patriarchal activity where in many congregations, the contributions of women are overlooked. And women have the capacity of training children, whether in many societies, including Africa, women have more capacity in raising children than men. Men do well, though, but women are better at that work, raising children. I think that if we can engage the gender aspect where women are empowered to bring young people into mission, that would be very important. In fact, let me mention that from the time I begin to observe this, what I did for my own children is to encourage them to be involved in the activities of the church at whatever age they were. When I discovered this, my daughter immediately joined the protocol team at age 8, together with the adults. So they put the tag on their neck. She also put one tag, and she gets so excited. Surprisingly, she is now in the teens, and she is enjoying her protocol work. Nobody forces her, it flows naturally. My boy joined the media team at a very tender age. Now he's doing computer science because it has become part of him. And I think that when we involve children in the mission of the church at early stage and they work alongside adults, it becomes a natural flow of them. We don't force them to go to church. Sometimes they leave their house and go to church before I finish preparing because they know they have something they have to go and do at church.
Right. I think we're probably just out of time. Just one very short question. When it comes to the study of missiology, is there any way the age gap, how would you address the age gap there?
Yeah, okay, so when we come to the study of missiology, as I said, even though we are doing well in teaching missiology, like I said, our emphasis has been on mission to foreign lands. We haven't actually intentionally considered age gap. So, and of course, young people are into mission studies, but they are also studying mission, maybe intercultural mission to the foreign lands, multicultural missions to foreign lands, cross-cultural missions to foreign lands. I want to see cross-cultural mission to generation, intercultural mission to generations, multicultural missions to generations, whichever mission we have, the same mission to generations. Whatever the age would be, mission should be across time.
Great.
I do have something on that one, too.
One last word.
Yep. I also think that we need to be continually updating the frames of missiology that are offered to young people, just like what we're doing here. That I know that for myself, when I was, in Sunday school as a child, the models of mission were really antiquated because those materials hadn't been updated in forever. And I'm not sure that we've ever considered within the missiological conversation what materials for children at different ages really need to look like. But I am encouraged that the questions that adults ask are just more complicated versions of what children ask in general. So if we can use that as the model and just figure out, okay, how can we, what of this can we explain to children and encourage their questions, I think we're going to be on the right track.
Great. Well, thank you both very much indeed.